go ahead and begin, and we'll try to let you go on time. Our lesson for next week is a little bit of an excursus from our normal Genesis study. We'll get back to that on the 27th. But for next week, and I appreciate the emphasis, this weekend of the 20th coincides with the March for Life and the Roe v. Wade decision, back in 1973. And so because of that, the lesson has focused on the sanctity of life. Not just the life of the unborn, but also the concept of from conception to natural death. Life should be valued. And I think all of us are aware that we live in a society that has de-emphasized the value of human life at both ends of the spectrum and along the way, by the way. And so we as Christians, I think, should be quick and eager to stand up for the sanctity of life and the fact that we are created in the image of God. And that puts value on every human soul. And Christians, more than anybody else, should probably be quick to take that stand. It's a terrible thing that our society has been allowed to get in a circumstance where they are telling the world that Christians are the evil ones. Yeah. When really, the accusations of racists and bigots and all those kinds of things, just because we say, thus saith the Lord at times, and this is the way it is. But the truth of the matter is Christians should be the most caring people when it comes to issues of justice and when it comes to issues of caring for people and for their soul. And I think this lesson has something to say about that. So that second bullet there, I just want to get you flowing on your thoughts a little bit. But the whole issue, and I've dealt with this in several contexts in the past, but what or who determines the value of something? What or who determines the value of a person? And I used that example, and I used it in this illustration. The items that we say are valuable, it's because we assign worth to those things. Silver does not weep because it's not as valuable as gold. Those things are just things. We are the ones that have assigned value and worth to those things. And so you might just kind of make sure that everybody understands that importance, worth, value, dignity, all those things come on what we decide is valuable. And for Christians, certainly we should understand what's valuable is humans, human life, and human souls. And our verses that we're going to pick and choose from speak to that issue. So you'll notice that we start in Genesis 1:27. We look at Genesis 9, which is after the flood and God's Noahic commission covenant with Noah about life and the sanctity of life. And then we look at the words of Jesus in Matthew 5, okay? All right, so just quickly jumping into this. The Genesis 1 reference, I remind you that on the days of creation, as God viewed the creative act, he said, it's good, it's good, it's good. He said that multiple times. I've included the verses there. But on the last day, when he created humans, and in verse 27 of chapter 1, it says, and he created them in his image. Amen. And then what did he say about the creation of man? It is very good. And so with that premise, we're jumping into this lesson. God created humanity in his image, giving human life sacred value. That's our big idea. All right. The first emphasis, and it's throughout the lesson, but we are created in his image. All right? And then I ask, after we read that verse in Genesis 1:27, what is unique about humans as opposed to all other creatures on earth? Well, just for sake of time, again, humans are created in the image of God. Animals, no other creature has that distinction in the Bible. Humans are the only ones that have a soul. Now, people can debate about whether or not animals are in heaven. Well, we probably could argue that there are, as far as at least white horses. Jesus is riding one. But the point of it is, animals are distinctly different. God created humans, and God has put us above all other animals on the earth. And because of our uniqueness, we have the ability to see the attributes of God and, as believers, mimic those attributes. So when you talk about love or joy or peace, animals don't have that. They don't have that discernment, that understanding, that intellect. It's uniquely human, and it's because we're made in God's likeness, James 3. The other thing that's involved in chapter 127 is that it says specifically that all humans are created in God's image, but it specifically states, what did God create? In those verses, what were the distinctions mentioned about humans?
Male and female.
Yes, there's only two distinctions. And this is a timely point for us to emphasize that God created male and female in the likeness of God and in his image. And even though our world wants to blur with all kinds of aberrant definitions about human sex, there's only two in the Bible. And there's only two biologically. And so we certainly are going to camp on that position. All right, so not only are we made in his image, but we are to recognize that human life is to be protected. And that's really the Noahic covenant. And so in that, God gave Noah some specific instructions. And he said, following the flood, it was going to be different than it was before the flood. And I even do a little bit of comparison between the Noahic covenant in Genesis 9 versus the Adamic covenant that God gave Adam in Genesis 1. And so you'll remember that in Genesis 1, God had said to Adam and Eve, you have this abundant yes. You can eat of all of the fruit, of anything in the garden, with the exception of one. It's one single prohibition. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And yet that's where the temptation ends up coming. What's unique about the issue after the flood in the Noahic covenant? What does God say about food? Yes, he basically declares it is fitting you are to have dominion over the earth. You and your sons are supposed to replenish the earth and fill it, but you are to have dominion over all of the animals, and all of those animals are going to be fit for you to eat. Now, in the what?
Except the blood.
Yes, and that is included in that covenant, isn't it? Good. I'm glad you mentioned it, Vincel. It's certainly something you need to deal with in the text. Now, keep in mind, with the Noah covenant, it's pre-law. It's before Moses. It's before any of the Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy law of God. And once we get to the Mosaic law, there will be some prohibitions for the Israelites as far as their eating. But what's true in Genesis 1 is it appears that Adam and Eve ate the green plants. Now, there's no prohibition against eating animals. But there really is a question on whether or not there was ever a need to ever kill any animals to be consumed. Following Noah and following the flood, that seems to be the line of demarcation, is that God said, now you have dominion and you have the responsibility to subdue the earth, and all of the animals are available to you. And so if someone is questioning about that, keep in mind that there will be some prohibitions established in the Mosaic law later. But most of those issues are matters of safety and just the fact that God wanted to instill certain dietary laws for his people to observe in a special way. Okay. The other part about this is what Vincel said, and that is the prohibition in the Noahic covenant about how to handle blood. The Bible, throughout the Bible, it says that the blood is equated to life. And that has so many implications, especially even when we get to the sacrifice of Jesus and the shedding of his blood for the remission of sins. But in the context of Noah, God said it's okay to eat anything, but you need to eat it properly. You need to make sure you don't eat anything live with the blood still in it. And when you slaughter it, take it for food, make sure that it has been properly handled as far as the blood. It's not supposed to be where there's any blood involved as far as drinking it or anything like that. And what we're going to see as society and civilization moves forward, there's going to be all kinds of paganism where they are emphasizing the drinking and eating of blood because they believe there was some kind of mystical power in that blood. That's why the Mosaic covenant has prohibitions against it, primarily, as in the case with a lot of the Mosaic law, it's a reaction to the pagan, ungodly neighbors that the Israelites are going to live near. And don't be like them. In fact, the first thing is don't have any other gods before me and don't make any graven images. All those things are related to the pagans around them. Don't eat blood either or drink it. Okay, that's all part of this discussion that God gives Noah. But also in the Noahic covenant, God establishes, really, it's the foundation for civil government. Because it says that Noah and his descendants, they are to protect the sanctity of life. In fact, if an animal kills a human, that animal is to be killed. And if another human kills a human, then that person is to sacrifice their life. Now, what's very interesting in the wording of it, God makes the case that justice should be done in this. There should be a scrutiny of the situation. In fact, later on, again in the Mosaic Law, we're going to have actually cities of refuge where God says, hey, there is such a thing as an accidental death. And it's not an eye for an eye at that point. It is to be used discerningly and a recognition of whether or not this was a premeditated situation. And so part of that is entailed in the civil government part of the Noahic covenant. But the point we're driving home is the sanctity of life. We are to protect human life. And those who shed human life, they're guilty of just murder in a premeditated way. They are to be judged. All right? So all of that is part of our lesson here. Then quickly, you'll remember it. Jesus takes it another step when he's dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, because in Matthew 5, Jesus talks about the sanctity of life at a whole different level. It's more than just the action, it's the attitude. And this is the passage where Jesus says, if you hate your brother, that's the same as murder. And so, whereas there would not be the physical judgment upon them, life for a life, Jesus equated it and said, hey, how can you say you value human life and then hate your brother or your sister? And so that's part of this answer Jesus gives about how the law was to be understood when it comes to the issue of attitude towards people. And so when the significance of Jesus equating hatred with murder, that is a big deal related to the heart of the law and not just the law itself. Okay? So in conjunction with the weekend where we're recognizing Roe v. Wade and the whole March for Life and the sanctity of life issue, it's timely that we just take a little break from our Genesis study to emphasize what the Bible says about the sanctity of life. And I think I think you'll have a good study with this. So, all right. And again, just be careful. Don't walk into a minefield on this where you're going to be, somebody's going to want to debate about abortion or something like that. The main issue, even the issue of capital punishment, because that's what the Noahic law is dealing with. And there are different Christians who view differently the issue of capital punishment. What clearly comes from the text, though, is that God is emphasizing that we should protect human life. We're in God's image that we're made, and indeed, there should be an understanding that all human life is valuable, whether it's the life of the unborn or the life at the end of life where people are wanting to euthanize old people, and it's not because of natural death causes. So that's really the thrust of what we want to talk about here, okay? I think you'll have an interesting discussion about this, and it'll be timely, okay? And then we'll get back to our Genesis study on Jacob going forward on the 27th.